Alright, I'm going to make a quick video here about the P0449 check engine light error code and the vent canister solenoid, which I have in my hand. So the short version of this is a lot of GM vehicles, in this case 2008 Hummer H3. You get a check engine light. You take your code reader, a lot of good inexpensive ones available now, OBD2 code reader. That code reader gives you a 0449 error code, which where's the effect of vent canister leak or failed solenoid. So since the 1970s, part of emission control on cars is the vapors from the fuel have to be captured in an activated carbon canister. System generally works well. Now this is a 2008 and this is 2023, so obviously the parts in this truck are pretty old, so it's not shocking things start to fail. When you get a P0449, one thing that's concerning is if you don't solve it quickly, there's just so many lengths of vacuum line that you start to worry about. But in this case, the things you do first check your gas cap. Now it's interesting, I did a little bit of diagnostic work. I took, right here at the gas cap, I put a plastic bag, taped it down, reset the code, and it didn't come back. And I thought, well, there you go, it's a bad seal. I bought another gas cap, waited a couple days, it arrived, popped it in there, and the check engine light came right back on. So I thought, well, that stinks. So presumably it was just a fluke because the computer has to cycle through. I don't know why the check engine light didn't reset that particular time and go back on, just because I had taped, a plastic bag over that. Clearly that was not what was going to fix it. It was no big deal. The gas cap that I bought was 20 bucks, and I needed a new one anyway because the tether was broken on the old one. So that was that. So then I consulted Mr. Google again and learned the next logical thing to look at is to do a test on this solenoid. So I'll show it to you at this end, not under the truck. And notice a lot of the parts will have a pigtail because there's two different types of wiring harnesses on GM trucks. Mine actually takes this type of plug, so they provided in this kit, just make sure you get the pigtail that has the harness that matches your vehicle. That's the nature of the plug for a 2008, at least, well, for any Hummer H3. So there's a pretty good video. I went through it in some detail, and this guy said, put your test light across these posts on the plug going to the vent solenoid. And he describes, which size wrench and everything else to use to remove the canister. So I popped that loose and set it up with a test light, which took some doing. You have to be careful not to bend the contacts in the plug. And what he predicted was correct. As soon as I had the resistance of the test light across the two poles coming from the truck, the check engine light went off and stayed off. So that, and according to him, that diagnostic pretty much tells you the reason you're getting the 449 code is because of the vent solenoid. It's like a $50 part. He said, check that before you buy one. So then I've found another video where a guy said, and typically if the check engine light comes back almost immediately after you reset it, he said that's typically not a leak, that's typically the solenoid itself. Now I'll just add, I'm going to take some pictures under there. Based on the information he provided, I thought, well, if a test light's resistance is enough to get the computer to leave you alone, and I had some 1/4 watt resistors on my workbench here, so I just kind of wandered over here. It's a little cluttered at the moment. And these are just 1/4 watt resistors. These happen to be 1.5 kilo ohm. I'm not sure what resistance you need, but that worked. I just bent the resistor, shoved it in the plug after I was done with the test, put a plastic bag and a twist tie over it to keep it from getting dirty while I waited for this part to arrive. I don't know if most people currently stock them. I just wasn't in the mood to fool around, so I just ordered it on Amazon and had it come a couple days later. So I'm going to get under there now. For what it's worth, the 1.5 kilo ohm 1/4 watt resistor worked fine. It persuaded the computer that the solenoid was functioning correctly. That apparently that's an acceptable resistance that it was expecting to see. The other thing that's a little weird is my code reader typically will only reset a code with the engine off, with the key in the on position but the engine not running. For some reason, this particular code would only reset while the engine was running. Never seen that before. So I don't know if that's due to my code reader, but just be aware, at least on my truck, resetting the 449 code was a little tricky, and it was important to be able to reset it, because when I reset it and immediately threw the code again, as other people said in their diagnostics, that was the second bit of proof that this is the part that is failing. So I'm going to get under there. I'll get under there and take a few pictures, and then I'll pop that in, and then show in the video whether or not taking the resistor out and plugging this back in keeps the check engine light off. All right, I'm going to take Mr. GoPro down here with me just so the full perspective is there as to where this is on a Hummer H3. It's basically up in the chassis right in front of that resonator in the exhaust here at the back. So there's your back bumper. I've got a headlight on that's illuminating it a little bit. I'll try to position the headlamp as I get closer. You need a 13mm wrench or socket to remove the one anchoring bolt. And I think I'm going to need a large flat screwdriver here to pop the part out. But first you just need to get in here and ascertain whether you think this is the problem or not. So just took the headlight off my head to shine a little better light on there. That is the vent canister right there above that bracket. That is the bolt. You have to get up above that, and it's a 13mm head on the bolt. You also notice, to fight corrosion on this truck, I live up in the north, I've slattered everything with P0449. So in my case, I don't know which would have been worse, the rust or what was the effect of the P0449. So it really was very hard for me to get that bolt out, just because the threads were encased in P0449. 3 extra arms down here. All right, so that is the little plastic bag I put on the wiring harness from the truck. The actual plug of the vent solenoid is right up in here. So I'm going to take that bolt out, slide it out of position. I'm going to remove this hose clamp. I'll show you how the vent solenoid kind of attaches to the canister, and why I think that flat screwdriver is going to be useful. And I'll try and get another better shot when I take the bag off of exactly how I popped that resistor in there. Bolt is removed. There's again where this main solenoid hose hooks. And that's where the canister is, and that's where the cable is now. I'm just going to lift this up. It's actually right back in here that these are holding on to the canister. So you just need to kind of slide it to the driver's side, and those pop out pretty easily. And then you can just kind of wiggle it. Now I don't want to disconnect all of these hoses and remove the canister. I could, I just don't need to. So I'm going to try and be gentle not to mess with them. I'm going to disconnect it here, and then get this out a little farther. You can kind of see how this clamps right in here. I don't know if that's going to show up on the camera at all, but the vent canister solenoid just kind of slides out there. That's going to be the little bit of brute force here to try and get that bad boy out. Alright, now one of the videos mentioned how you have to manipulate this hose clamp right here. What he did, he put a small screwdriver in each side. That's what I'm kind of struggling with right now with the old one, is I can push it back, but I can't push it far enough back for this to... So there's basically like a little ferrule fitting, like my index finger here. So I can get this on camera. And that clamps on it, on that little ring. So you have to push this back sufficiently far for it to slide off the ring. And so far, because of how awkward the reach is, I can't get that to pop up enough to slide the old part off. So I'm going to try the trick that one of the guys mentioned in a video, where he just used 2 very small flat screwdrivers to kind of push the clamp off. Alright, so there's the old and the new part. You see I had to kind of push that jobber up out of the way. That's where I had to just put a small flat screwdriver in there, as another guy described in a video. There was nothing sophisticated about this. First I had to look at the new part and realize I had to get a screwdriver in here and bend this up. And then I had to get a screwdriver in here, and without tearing up all the plastic parts, just gently, probably 30-40 times, pushing on it before this old rusty clamp finally popped out. So you can see new clamp, old clamp. Now the only difference I see is this little shield is zip tied on there. I assume that's an improvisation that GM decided was necessary for the Hummer. So I'm going to go ahead and snip that zip tie, grab another zip tie, and affix this on there in the same way. Then I'll clamp on the hose. I'll probably, before I snap this in, if it'll reach, I'll probably plug this in and verify the check engine light's not going to come on before I shove this sliding clamp back in, just because it's a pain in the tush to try to get it back out should I need to remove it. Alright, so I transferred that little shield on there, clips on there, clips on over here, and then they had a zip tie around the belly, so I got all that on. So again, I'll pop the hose on the canister, I'll remove my resistor and plug in this harness, fire up the truck, make sure the check engine light doesn't come on, assuming that this has been the problem all along and I don't need to worry about that little resistor. Then I'll snap this back in where it's kind of permanent, and that'll be the end of this simple little job. Again, I'll put links for where I bought the parts and all, as well as to the other videos I consulted. Alrighty. Hopefully Mr. GoPro will behave. So, there is the connection, a new part in place, the wiring harness. Right there is where the hose connects to the canister, and it popped right on, and obviously it's much less old and hardened than the old version. Now this I'm going to take off now. This is where it may be of interest, and I'll show. Pull this glove off. A little too hard to do with a gloved hand. But this is where I kind of did a little hack here, where I just twist tied this plastic over the plug after I put that 1/4 watt resistor in there, because since the check engine light just was bugging the snot out of me, and to me I don't like driving around even for a day or two with a check engine light, because I don't know if it threw another code. That would be just my luck. But you can see that's just a simple 1/4 watt resistor, 1.5 kilo ohm, stuck in the connector, and that persuades it that there's an acceptable solenoid there, and it'll stop throwing the check engine light. Here you can see the little clip, that's the dongle. So this is again a little bit longer than the original harness to match this connector that's in the Hummer. Other styles of GM vehicles that use the same part have a very slightly different plug, and that's this little pigtail connects the two. Go on here this way. Of course, the polarity has to be right or it's not going to work. So if this doesn't work, I'll switch it the other way. But it certainly looks like that's the way it should clip. And this guy is just to clip it onto the metal of the harness chassis somewhere. I'll do that after I put everything together. Alright, so it's plugged in, it's connected. I haven't reattached anything properly. I just want to make sure the check engine light stays off before I bolt everything back together. Alright, moment of truth here. I'll open the garage door a little bit to vent the exhaust. And let's see now if I fire up the engine, if it throws the 449 code again. Alright, so far so good. If you're familiar with this code, if it does not detect this, what it wants from that solenoid, it relatively quickly will come back and throw the check engine light on. So if the code stays off, like this is way longer right now, it has stayed off longer than it ever did while that solenoid was bad. Alright, so that's good. So that means not only do I not have an annoying check engine light, but I also have a properly functioning vent solenoid, which means any gas vapors are appropriately being passed through the vapor canister, which uses activated carbon to catch them, trap them so they don't get out in the atmosphere. I'm an environmental engineer by training, that's why some of this is of some interest to me. Those carbon canisters, I assume it's activated carbon, they capture the vapors. Vapors are volatile organic compounds or volatile organic material that is a smog precursor. So not a problem where I live in Illinois anyway, but nevertheless, it's nice to have this system functioning as intended. Looking good. Again, a $50 part, not a terrible repair.